My name is Maren Rosenberg. I am an actor and theater maker. I lived in Palestine for off and on for about 3 years. I first went to the region in, uh, and then first time I was in the region, it was 2008. I went on birthright, and then I felt really drawn to go back to sort of figure out what else was going on. I felt like I had a very incomplete picture, and ended up going for the first time in the summer of 2009. And then I did a quick trip back to the US and then pretty much was there until 2012.
So I know what birthright is, but do you mind telling a little bit more about that?
Sure. So Birthright is a program sponsored by the Israeli government, along with the Jewish National Fund. And it is a program that is a fairly all expense paid trip to Israel. So all you have to do is prove that at least one of your grandparents was Jewish. And you then get a flight, a tour. You're with other young Jewish people around your same age group. I think it's anywhere between like 18 and 25. And the idea is for people to, for Israel to get an opportunity to introduce itself to the Jewish community and to give people the opportunity to travel there and connect with the culture, connect with the community, and feel very invested in it. When I was there, there were birthright groups from Canada and Argentina, and a lot of them from the US. And of course, also there are young Israelis on the trips as well, for a certain amount of time. And usually they're still doing their army service. But again, it's creating those kinds of, those connections and attachments to the country and the community. My distaste for it was that I felt like it was very one-sided. And while it has been described to me, it's like, well, it's like, it's like your first date, you don't want to talk about all the bad stuff on your first date. It just made me feel like stuff was being hidden from me. And they make a very big deal on Birthright about how, we do what we do because we do this for all Jews all around the world so that you may return home if you want to. This is the wording they use. I'm not from Israel. Don't descend from that region of the world, but they, the idea of having this Jewish state as a optional home for me because I am Jewish, was like really hit very heavily. And so I then felt like, well, if people are doing all this stuff for me, for my people, on our behalf, I am now somewhat obligated to understand what is really being done.
Yeah.
And I then felt like I really didn't have adequate access to learn about what else was happening in Palestine, and really didn't have the ability to connect with or speak with Palestinian people, just from where I was living in the US. So I went over there. Oh, go for it.
No, sorry, just wanted to clarify. When you say Palestine, are you talking about like the state of Palestine or the state of Israel, which used to be known as Palestine? Or are you talking about just the Palestinian areas inside of Israel?
So when I say I went to Palestine, I am referring to the West Bank. Okay. I'm not referring to 1948 or 1967 borders.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Sorry, continue.
Sure. So I'm an actor and a theater maker. I did a community exchange, and then I had the opportunity to stay, and so I worked on Palestinian television programs and with Palestinian theater companies. I did medical clowning work, and just had the opportunity to see for myself what was happening and what was going on, and was absolutely formative and, the art that I want to make, as well as, the way I want to live in the world and approach the world. And yeah, and so I moved back to the US in 2012, but still very connected with the Palestinian community's theater world. And I'm also right now I am the co-artistic director of Uprising Theater, which was founded by your professor. So that's what I'm up to now.
Okay. So I guess kind of follow up on what you said. You talked about how you worked in Palestinian TV. You did a lot of stuff with that. What did you see? I guess what did you learn working with them, and what did you learn in your experiences with all that?
Specifically with respect to the conflict?
Not necessarily. If you want to cover,
Okay.
if you want to talk about that, sure. But it can also be just in general.
So I definitely think that while I was working with Palestinian artists on theater, film, you just become very aware of the the full systemic reach of the occupation. It's not just the big stuff that makes the news. It's also the little things that, you're not able to make it to set on time because the soldier at the checkpoint just wouldn't let you through. And you had a really long hot day and you get back home and there's no water, and I was specifically living in a refugee camp called Aida, and the Israelis are responsible for delivering water, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And so there's water tanks, but if your tank has run out or, and not refilled on time, then you're suddenly like, well, now I'm hot and sticky and I feel uncomfortable and I can't take a shower.
You're just out of, there's nothing that you can do then.
Well, I mean, you can go see if your neighbor can let you use their shower if they have any water. But it's not just, big punch in the face kind of stuff. It's like, lots of little needle pricks as well. And it's kind of constant and every day. But I think the thing that, whether or not it's, I certainly don't advocate for it, but one of the things that does is I feel like it creates a community that's very alive and very present and very in the moment, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. My house may get bulldozed, or I may get arrested in the middle of the night. So while we're here, while we're present, let's be really here and really present. And that, we talk about that a lot, especially as actors, being present, being in the moment. And while I feel like as an American, I sort of have to have had to learn that, and being able to kind of turn it off and on for the purposes of my work. There it's, the entire community is present, all the time, and getting to experience that and live in that, whether it was on a film set or, just going to buy groceries. People don't sort of casually do a like, hi, how are you? They actually really want to know how you are doing and will stop and talk to you for 5 minutes. This does also create an issue if like you're meant to be somewhere, because then they're like, no, but I really want to talk to you. I really want to know how you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm supposed to be somewhere else. And, they're like, okay, but we're here right now and that's in the future. So I would say that also was something that I felt really, really struck me. And there's an amazing amount of resilience, but also an incredible amount of just, forgive my language, but there's a lot of inhumane bullshit that people are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And you may not even have an answer for this, and it's okay if you don't. What do you think people in the US could do to help the situation in Israel and Palestine?
Well, I think, the first thing is, try to continue to, I guess the very first thing is continue to ask questions. We get very one-sided information in the US. And I think a lot of people like to, we talk about censorship that takes place in China or, African countries, but what we don't realize, I think people are becoming more media aware that the media that we are shown is often very one-sided. And for folks to continue to ask questions and challenge the idea that all is as it seems. It's not. And so if people have the opportunity to go over and see for themselves, I think it becomes abundantly clear very quickly. But if not, there are a couple of things folks can do. Certainly they can actively ask their their representatives in Congress, their senators, to be more supportive of the Palestinian people and less sort of, oh, Israel can do whatever it needs to or whatever it wants to. They're in a state of military crisis, so they just can do whatever they need to. Obviously, there is a very big difference between Judaism and Zionism, and I think also divorcing themselves from this idea that being critical of Israel, which is the government, is not the same as being critical of the Jewish people. And there are many Jews like myself who are not supportive of Israel or Zionism. Other things folks can do is there is a means of peaceful protesting called BDS, which is Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. It was exceptionally effective in bringing down apartheid in South Africa. And so that effectively means that while you're not actively people will state that it's discriminatory, but what you're doing is saying until Israel, treats people with basic human rights, or follows international law, stops apartheid, we will not financially support these things. It's a very hot button topic and people get very tightly wound about it, but really it's just saying, hey, if we live in capitalism, we'll speak to you in a way that you understand, which is through our pocketbooks and in yours. So that means, not buying Sabra hummus or SodaStream, or, telling Caterpillar and Hewlett Packard to stop, their contracts. And you've seen that there's also a greater degree of awareness. There's a bunch of Amazon and Google employees right now who were saying that they didn't want to work on a thing called Project Nimbus, which was a large defense contract that got, I think it was more than $1 billion. And, these staff were saying, I don't want to be a part of doing this thing. You could choose to not open a branch of a business someplace. It doesn't necessarily mean that you just immediately go out and say, you're Israeli and therefore I will not, talk to you, work with you. It means that if you are connected to the Israeli government by, paying taxes to them or in some ways financially supporting them, that you are removing your support from that individual business entities, etc. And I would say those are sort of the big ones that I can see. And I think just also normalizing the again, another big one is just normalizing the idea that being opposed to apartheid and not being Zionist is a separate thing from being anti-Jewish. People will say the phrase anti-Semitic, but that's actually a very problematic phrase because Palestinians are Semitic as well. But again, here's, when most people say anti-Semitic, they mean anti-Jewish.
All right, this is Savannah speaking. And if you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name is Matthew Haddad. I'm 20 years old, and I'm Jordanian and Palestinian.
Awesome. And the questions that we have for you today is, what do you see in the news media about Palestine or Israel?
So in the news, I see a lot of depictions of Palestinians as oppressors and trying to take away the freedom of the Israelis. This is notable by the publicity that the loss of Palestinian lives and torment that they face on the daily is portrayed by the media. At the same time, highlighting the few casualties and few injuries that Israeli soldiers suffer and the few amount of civilians that are actually injured. They always record the bombs that Hamas throws, which are measly firework rockets that almost never hit their targets and almost never hit any citizens, but decline to show the tanks and armed soldiers and checkpoints that they have on Palestinian territory.
Does the media's view match up with your reality?
So I would say that the view of the media is not accurately portraying the situation because they're only showing the Israeli side or the Western view of the occupation.
So does the United States understand the struggle of the Palestinians? What are your thoughts?
So for the third question, that's really tough because it depends on if you're talking about the government or the people. The people do not truly understand the struggles of the Palestinians, and that's because they're force-fed a false agenda, a false reality. But at the same time, the United States government is fully aware of what they're doing to the Palestinian people, and they choose to ignore that because they want control of the region and they want the resources that comes with it, and the trading ports, and they want so the land, and they want the instability in the region because that instability leads to more exploitation of resources.
What are things that you heard about this situation or crisis that stuck with you?
And probably some of the craziest things I've heard of is the fact that they take children as prisoners with no rights for the parents, or they can even just take your house if they say so. Like, people can walk up to your house, say, "This is my house now, you're evicted," and soldiers will escort you out if you don't listen, and they will kill you if you don't comply. That's probably the craziest thing I've ever heard of. Like, and then they sit here and call them terrorists when they're just being kicked out of their houses. Like, what do you expect someone to do? Not retaliate?